This video was made possible thanks to the support of our amazing patrons. We couldn't do this without you.
Don't forget that you can support the channel for free and receive 10% off orders over $10 at Flipside Gaming by using the promo code Affinity at the checkout. Or if TCG Player or Magic Madhouse are more your thing, then be sure to place your order through our affiliate links in the description. Once again, at no extra cost to yourselves.
Hello there everybody and welcome to another EDH gameplay video brought to you by Affinity for Commander. My name is Martin and today we have our first non-webcam gameplay video in almost 7 months. It was really great seeing our local playgroup again after such a long time, even if we only got to meet each other a few times before the country went back into lockdown. Here's hoping that it's safe to gather again in the new year for some quality spell slinging action. Oh, and one more thing. Be sure to watch until the end of the video where we'll be giving away this Arm for Battle Commander deck. But without further ado, let's take a look at those opening hands.
I'm playing my Chulane Teller of Tales value deck. I keep an opening hand containing Llanowar Elves, Faebor Elder, Growing Rites of Itlamok, Set's Tiger, Razorverge Thicket, Temple Garden, and a Plains.
I'm playing my Seton Croson Protected Druid Tribal deck. I keep an opening hand of Elvish Mystic, Elvish Pioneer, Incubation Druid, Somberwald Sage, Yavimaya Elder, and 2 forests.
James is playing his Elenda the Dusk Rose token deck. His opening hand consists of Yeheni Undying Partisan, Sorin Vengeful Bloodlord, Utter End, Terramorphic Expanse, Godless Shrine, Phyrexia's Core, and a Swamp.
And finally, Terence is playing his Nin the Pain Artist control deck. His starting hand is made up of Mana Crypt, Electro Dominance, Pull from Tomorrow, Halimar Depths, Castle Ventress, Sheevan Reef, and a Mountain.
James wins the die roll and starts things off by playing Terramorphic Expanse. He immediately sacrifices the land to put a Plains into play tapped, and passes to me.
Alex plays Razorverge Thicket and casts Llanowar Elves. With nothing more to do, he passes the turn.
Terence plays Halimar Depths and rearranges the top 3 cards of his library. Not quite a good scrying, but by no means a bad effect on turn 1. He complains about how bad his next few draws are going to be, and then ends his turn.
I play Forest and cast Elvish Mystic. Terence points out how much better Alex's mana dork looks than mine, to which the rest of the table agrees, and I pass to James.
James plays Godless Shrine, having the Shockland enter tapped. Unable to cast anything at this point, he passes the turn.
Alex plays a Plains and casts Growing Rites of Itlamok. He looks at the top 4 cards of his library, revealing Karametra, God of Harvest, and puts the deity into his hand before ending his turn.
Terence plays a Mountain and casts Search for Azcanta. Happy with his play, he then passes to Martin.
I play another Forest and cast my commander, Seton Croson Protector. Next I tap Seton with his own ability to cast Elvish Pioneer, whose ETB I choose to ignore given that I don't have any forests in my hand. Sad times. With nothing more to do, I pass the turn.
James plays a Swamp and taps out to cast Forerunner of the Legion. He searches his library for Cruel Celebrant, putting the Vampire on top of his library, and ends his turn.
Alex plays an island and casts Faebor Elder, who enters as a 2/2. He then considers attacking Terence for a cheeky point of damage, but decides against it and passes the turn to him instead.
Terence mills an island with Search for Azcanta, plays a different island, and casts his commander, Nin the Pain Artist. Happy with his play, Terence then passes the turn.
I begin my turn by playing Opal Palace and then cast Yavimaya Elder. Next I tap 3 druids to cast Somberwald Sage, and then tap my remaining 2 druids to cast Incubation Druid. Now that's what I call a turn 3 board state. Pleased with the army that I have amassed, I end my turn.
James draws the Cruel Celebrant on top of his library and plays Phyrexia's Core. He then casts his commander, Elenda the Dusk Rose, and passes to me.
Alex plays Canopy Vista and then asks me if I want to be friends. I respond with a hesitant maybe, and Alex warns me that if I attack him with my battalion of druids, there will be consequences. I thank him for this information, and Alex casts the Karametra God of Harvest that we saw him put into his hand earlier. Unfortunately for him, Alex is one devotion short of making his god a creature, and he then passes a turn.
Terence chooses not to put the top card of his library into his graveyard with his enchantment ability, and then plays Castle Vantress. Next he casts Puppet Strings, and with 1 mana remaining, ends his turn.
I start my turn by casting Kindred Summons, causing everybody else at the table to groan loudly. Sorry, not sorry. I put Arbor Elf, Channeler Initiate, Druid Lyrist, Morwen the Nurturer, Elvish Harbinger and Beast Whisperer into play with the summons, and begin the lengthy task of resolving all of my newly acquired creatures' abilities. I put 3+1/+1 counters on Morwen, 3 -1/-1 counters on my Channeler, and search my library for Guiltleaf Archdruid with my Harbinger's ECB. I put the land-stealing elf on top of my library, resulting in further groaning from my opponents, and then tap 3 druids to cast Krosan Restorer. I draw the Archdruid on top of my library of Beast Whisperer, and appreciate the fact that I have 14 creatures off of only 3 lands on turn 4. Now that is some good going if I do say so myself. Finally out of druids to cast, I pass to James.
James plays a Swamp, and casts the Cruel Celebrant that he tutored for a few turns ago. Forerunner of the Legion triggers, and James chooses to give his commander +1/+1 before casting Yeheni, Undying Partisan. The Forerunner triggers once more with James targeting Elenda again, and James then moves to combat. He rolls the dice to decide who he should attack, which results in a now 3/3 Elenda coming at me. I declare no blocks, taking 3 damage, and James gains 3 life from his commander's life link. With nothing more to do, James then passes the turn.
Alex plays a Plains and casts a very shiny Nylea Keen-Eyed. Karametra's ability triggers, allowing Alex to search his library for Prairie Stream and put it into play tapped. Why she doesn't say basic land I'll never know, but alas, here we are. The arrival of Nylea gives Alex enough devotion to make both his bow-wielding god and Karametra creatures, proving once and for all that friendship is the true treasure. Or something like that anyway. Alex then moves to his end step, transforming Grown Rights of Itlimoc into Itlimoc Cradle of the Sun. This lowers his devotion to green by 1, revoking Karametra of her creature privileges, and Alex ends his turn.
Terence once again decides not to mill the top card of his library with Search for Counter, and plays Shivan Reef. Next he casts a cheeky Mana Crypt, and passes to Martin.
I begin my turn by casting Guiltleaf Archdruid, to which both James and Alex pass priority to respond to. I then tell Terence that if he lets the creature resolve, I will let him keep his lands, but if he interferes with my plans, I will attack him with all of my creatures. Not phased in the slightest, Terence casts Disallow, countering the druid before I can have my fun. Such a party pooper. Holding back the tears, I carry on with my turn by drawing a card from Beast Whisperer. I then cast Llanowar Elves, drawing another card and putting a +1/+1 counter on Morwen. Not yet finished, I play Temple of the False God and remove a -1/-1 counter from Channeler Initiate to add a green mana to my mana pool. I then tap all of my creatures and lands to float 17 more mana, and then spend all of it to cast Briarwood Elemental, which I kick 13 times. I draw a card of my Whisperer, create 13 2/2 wolf tokens, and pass the turn with a smile on my face.
James plays Orzhov Guildgate, and ends his turn without casting anything. How very sus. I respond to this by tapping Itlimoc to produce 3 green mana and activate Nylea's ability. I reveal the top card in my library to be a forest, put the land into my graveyard, and tap some lands to do this again. This time I reveal Torrential Gearhulk, put the construct into my hand, and proceed to my untap step.
Alex plays Gavany Township and activates Nylea's ability yet again. He reveals a forest, puts the land into his graveyard, and activates the god's ability once more. This time he reveals Sakura Tribe Elder, puts the Snake Man into his hand, and casts the Scaly Shaman for a single green mana thanks to Nylea's other ability. Karametra's ability triggers, allowing Alex to put Scattered Grove into play tapped. I remind Terence that Alex wouldn't have been able to do any of these things if he hadn't countered my Archdruid, and Alex activates Nylea's ability for a 3rd time. Talk about digging for answers. He He reveals the next card of his library to be Eladormi's Call, cries out in anguish and puts the tutor into his graveyard. Having apparently got nothing better to do, Alex activates Nylea's ability yet again, this time putting Phantasmal Image into his hand. He then sacrifices Steed to put an island into play tapped from his library, and James puts a +1/+1 counter on both Elenda and Yeheni. Finally lacking the mana to activate Nylea's ability, Alex passes to Terence, who responds by casting Mystical Tutor. He searches his library for Blasphemous Act, putting the board wipe on top of his library, and proceeds to his turn.
Terence, funnily enough, chooses not to mill the card that he just tutored for, and instead draws it. He then fails his Mana Vault trigger, taking 3 damage, and casts the Blasphemous Act we all knew was coming. James responds by sacrificing Forerunner of the Legion to Yeheni, making the Aetherborn indestructible until the end of turn, and puts a +1/+1 counter on his commander. Cruel Celebrant then triggers, causing Terence, Martin, and myself to each lose 1 life, and gaining James a life as well. Terence then responds to his own spell by activating Nin's ability, where X is 4. He has the Vidalcan target herself, dealing her 4 damage and drawing himself 4 cards. Nin is then destroyed, Yeheni gets a +1/+1 counter, and Elenda gets a +1/+1 counter as well. Blasphemous Act then finally resolves, and each creature is dealt 13 damage, destroying everything apart from Yeheni and my gods. Cruel Celebrant triggers twice, causing all of James' opponents to lose 2 life, and for him to gain 2 life. James then makes 4 1/1 vampire tokens of lifelink thanks to Elenda, whom he chooses to go into the graveyard rather than return her to the command zone. How peculiar. James then puts 30 +1/+1 counters on Yeheni, which is more than a little scary considering that Terence and I have no blockers or open mana. Oh dear. With nothing left to do, Terence ends his turn.
In my turn, I cast a sneaky morphed creature and then pass to James. I miss my humongous board state. James responds to this by casting Forsake the Worldly, exiling Nylea, and then moves to his turn.
James starts his turn by casting Sorin, Vengeful Bloodlord, and then moves to combat. Rather than crippling Terence or myself, he decides that Martin requires further punishment for the board state he managed to amass last turn, and attacks him with his Swole Vampire. Martin blocks the Aetherborn with his morphed creature, which he reveals to be Broodhatch Nantuko. Unfortunately for Martin, he doesn't have the mana to flip the Nantuko face up, so he doesn't get 34 insect tokens. Unlucky dearie. James, on the other hand, gains 34 life thanks to Sorin's ability, and moves to his post-combat main phase. Here he activates Sorin's +2 ability, dealing Martin 1 damage and gaining another life. Happy with his new life total, James passes the turn.
Alex begins his turn by casting his commander, Chulane, Teller of Tales. Karametra's ability triggers, and Alex puts Irrigated Farmland into play tapped from his library. That's like the 3rd dual land that he's been able to tutor for just by casting creatures? Just saying. Not yet finished, Alex casts Phantasmal Image, triggering Karametra once again. This time he puts a Plains onto the battlefield tapped, and has his illusion enter as a copy of Yeheni. Next he plays Flooded Strand, contemplates his options, and ends his turn.
Terence chooses not to mill a card with his enchantment, and casts one of his favourite creatures, Sai, Master Thopterist. Next he casts Iron Maiden, triggering his Artificer's ability and creating a 1/1 Thopter token with flying. Lacking the mana to cast any more spells, Terence passes to Martin.
I play a forest, allowing me to finally use my Temple of the False God and recast my commander. I use my Opal Palace's ability to have the Centaur enter with 2 +1/+1 counters, and then pass the turn.
James starts his turn by activating Sorin's minus ability, where X is 4. He returns Elenda to the battlefield, and then casts a very thematic Barter in Blood. I respond by flashing in Set's Tiger, putting Hallowed Fountain into play tapped with Karametra's ability. Chulane's ability then resolves, drawing me a card, and I put Temple Garden onto the battlefield this way. Did I mention that I really like to ramp? My kitty then resolves, and I choose to gain protection from black until the end of turn. Barter in Blood then resolves, and I sacrifice my Tiger and my Yeheni clone to the spell. Terence and Martin then sacrifice all of their creatures, and James sacrificed 2 of his vampire tokens, putting 5+1/+1 counters on Yahenni and 7+1/+1 counters on his commander. He then moves to combat where he considers attacking Martin, but ultimately decides to send Yahenni at Terence instead, given that Martin has an empty board and 1 card in hand. Don't worry though, James sends 2 vampires of his at Martin so he doesn't feel left out. Unable to stop the Aetherborn coming his way, Terence takes 39 damage, knocking him out of the game in one almighty hit. Martin takes 2 from the creatures coming at him, and James gains 41 life, increasing his life total to a very healthy 3 digits. In his second main phase, James plays a swamp, and with nothing more to do, ends his turn.
Alex begins his turn by casting a Magicia Shepherd, searching his library for a forest of Karametra's triggered ability. He then draws a Chulane but has no lands in hand to put into play. I feel so bad for him, honestly. Not to be deterred, Alex pays a life and sacrifices his Flooded Strand to put the planes into play tapped, triggering his Angel's ability. He returns Phantasmal Image to the battlefield, having it enter as a copy of his Shepherd. Because 2 landfall Angels are better than 1. The extra devotion to white granted by his illusion is enough to make Karametra a creature once more, and Alex then casts Torrential Gearhulk. Karametra triggers, allowing Alex to search his library for a forest before putting it into play tapped, and both of his Magicia Shepherd's abilities trigger. He puts the Set's Tiger and Llanowar Elves in his graveyard into his hand, draws a card from Chulane, and once again doesn't put a land onto the battlefield this way. Again, I feel absolutely terrible for him, really I do. Torrential Gearhulk's ETB then finally resolves, and Alex casts the Eladamri's Call in his graveyard without paying its mana cost. He searches his library for Deputy of Detention, puts the creature into his hand, and casts Llanowar Elves, triggering his god and commander yet again. Alex draws, and once again chooses not to put a land into play of Chulane. Insert sarcastic comment about Alex missing his land drop here. He then puts a forest onto the battlefield of Karametra's ability, and returns the Korotribe Elder to his hand from his graveyard. Still not finished with his incredibly long turn, Alex casts the Deputy of Detention that he just tutored for. He chooses not to find a land of Karametra, given that he now has no legal targets for his Angel's ability, and draws a card of Chulane. Still no land in hand, Alex? Well, that's not good enough. Alex then exiles the scarily big Yahenni on James's board and casts Sol Ring. Not wanting James and I to die of old age, Alex decides not to go to combat, scores down to 7 and passes to me.
Martin plays a forest and casts his commander for a 3rd time. With no remaining mana, he then passes the turn.
James starts his turn by activating Sorin's +2 ability, dealing me 1 damage and gaining a life. Next he casts Utter End, exiling Deputy of Detention and returning Yahenni to the battlefield, albeit a little smaller than when they left. Moving to combat, James attacks me with 2 of his vampire tokens, and I block 1 of them with my commander. I then take 1 damage, James gains 2 life, and Elenda gets a +1/+1 counter for witnessing her underling's demise. Happy with his actions, James then ends his turn.
In my turn, I cast Night of Autumn and use Karametra's ability to put the final planes in my library onto the battlefield. I return the Fairbower Elder in my graveyard to the battlefield with 1 of my Angel's triggers, but sadly lack a target for the second. Next, I cast Triumph of the Hordes, resulting in a chorus of boos from the rest of the table, as well as the players sat on the other 2 tables in the store. I choose to ignore their mean words though, and move to combat. Here I attack James with my Angels and Martin with everything else is able to do so, knocking them both out of the game with infect damage. What? Have you not learned that I'm a terrible person by now?
Well, that's it for another video. We hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did. Don't forget that you can help to support the channel in 4 quick and easy ways. Liking this video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that bell icon and leaving us a comment. I read every one. But now is the moment you've all been waiting for, the giveaway. We'll be giving away this Arm for Battle Commander deck to the winner of this competition, shipped anywhere in the world free of charge. But to be in with a chance to winning this deck, you have to do 2 things. 1. Be subscribed to the channel. Easy. And 2. Answer the following question in the comments of this video. 2020 has been a tough year for a lot of people, so we want you to tell us your favourite memory from the past 11 months. For me, it has to be just before the first UK lockdown, where a group of my friends met up and spent the night together around a campfire. It was a fantastic evening and I can't wait to see them all again. We will pick a winner on Monday the 7th of December, so be sure to have your entries submitted before then. The winner will be announced in our next video on Wednesday the 11th of December, so be sure to check it out, you could be the winner. Good luck to everybody who enters, and we'll see you next time.